So with that, we have just about, it's 10:31 Eastern time. I'm sure we'll have a few people that are joining us, a little bit late as we transition from meeting to meeting. But this is Dean Smith from HPRCT, and it's great to see all of you from the HPRCT community joining us today in our monthly webinar series. So we're trying to get these on a nice regular schedule of giving you the opportunity to explore really meaningful topics that can really help you in your roles and in your organizations. So there's with that little bit of introduction, be thinking as you're listening to David Troness today about, other topics and other things that you want to hear about that would be valuable for you in future upcoming webinars. And then you can send me an email or shoot me a chat after the session and let me know your thoughts, because we want to keep these relevant, meaningful, and applicable at the practitioner and at the strategic level. So with all that, I am thrilled to introduce David Troness. David is going to talk to us about science-based causal analysis. So it's an intriguing topic, and the thing that, and David, I'll let you talk more in a second, but I think, the thing that's very intriguing is David has a great background, more than 30 years in a bunch of different areas that have lent themselves very well to his exploration and learning on this topic and revelations that he's going to share with us today. So with that, David, the floor is yours, and welcome.
Oh, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I get excited and long-winded about these things, so I'm going to try to, really focus on being concise and control myself here. But I love this stuff. As you said, I've been doing this for 30 some years. Been at Intel a long time, Honeywell, taught at Arizona State University, several smaller companies as well. Always been focused on reliability engineering ever since I got out of grad school and started with Intel. But before that, strangely enough, I had a degree in social work and psychology. And so, for a few years anyway, after I went into engineering and got into the workplace, I thought, man, I really wasted those early years. I wish I had gotten, more diverse technical background, and that's always good. But later on, I realized how really beneficial, almost essential it can be to have a chance to truly solve problems from many different angles. Every problem that I've encountered, even ones that seem, exclusively technical, there's always a human aspect to it. And you'll see some of that as I go through this. So this topic, science-based causal analysis, or it's been called physics-based causal analysis. I have to shout out to my friend Larry Ball at Honeywell, who I worked with for a long time. I still collaborate with him a lot. He's the one who started this particular methodology, and I've worked with him and been a co-author of a lot of the books available on this. So I've known him for, I don't know, 20 years or so. But, and besides the way I've known him, besides the reliability part and the causal analysis, also I've gotten into something called trees. Not sure how many people have heard of that, but really has gotten me into the space of how can we solve the problem elegantly. So, of course, like all of you, we can put together nice graphs and PowerPoints showing, our reliability analysis in different ways. I started to, it's maybe obvious, but clearly the purpose for doing all this is to solve problems and to better the situation. And so this the trees part has really helped me go into that area. And I'll talk a little more about that as well. As a way to kind of structure going through this, I thought I'd just pick a simple idea. I I'm down in Phoenix, Arizona, so I don't deal with this kind of thing too much. Some of you are probably from the north, and this is all too familiar. So let's say the problem is, I'm not sure if you could say in this case we work for an insurance company or State Department of Transportation, whatever. Let's say the problem is there are too many rear end collisions in the winter. How are we going to attack that? I put just some examples here of ways that people try to address these problems. And I should say too, one other caveat right up front before I offend anyone. Everything I talk about here is my opinion from my experience. You may have directly opposite experience or success with different things. So I want to tell you what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me. Okay. In this case, 5 whys, you know, as you're all familiar with, basically asking why 5 times and moving down further into a possible element that is actionable. That's a pretty common one, of course. We use groups to do this in a conference room, for instance, and it's fairly quick. Another one that's been pretty, you know, widespread, done in a group. Again, not taking that long to do it, and it's basically, in my mind, a way of categorizing brainstormed ideas. And we give some categories. They can be the man, machine, method, and materials, or you can come up with other categories. And so in my mind, again, this has the, you know, several of those attributes that I would emphasize again, sort of a, I glanced at the chat for a minute. I got to not do that so I don't lose my train of thought. Basically, it's the brainstorming part that we want to think about for a minute here. Then, you know, there are lots of different options or types of root cause maps or trees. I just, you know, put in some basic things here. Actually, I did this in a couple of classes, and I just, you know, took some of the examples or some of their conclusions and put them in here. So in this case, of course, with a fault tree, you could also put in AND gates and OR gates and put in probabilities, and it would get, in many cases, much more down on the level of what are the components, the subsystems, and so on. And you're thinking in terms of how could those components, or what contribution could that component have to the overall system failure. And again, a fair amount of this, whether sometimes we, the people I work with, whether we admit it or not, it's a lot of brainstorming, which I use the joke that, you know, brainstorming could be abbreviated with BS. And then the other thing could be abbreviated with BS. So by the transitive property, brainstorming equals BS. That's kind of extreme, but it has its place, but not, in my mind, not in serious discussion of serious problems. It's there's just so much we could do in a more rigorous fashion. So motivation to do better, you've all probably experienced it. You know, you've seen ideas or decisions driven mainly by influential group members. I've seen problems that get solved and then solved again and again because they really were not adequately solved. There's a relatively narrow breadth and shallow depth of the analysis or the investigation. Very little data is plugged in. And then the last part, okay, we're left with several causes, but now what do we do? Where do we go from there? Unfortunately, I've also seen too much of just, you know, okay, what do we do? Let's brainstorm some ideas. That's just, I think of that as the caveman approach. It's not for a serious, long-standing problem where lives are on the line or millions and millions of dollars, that's not the approach to take in my mind. So we end up with ineffective, costly, and quite often pretty complex solutions. So we, along with Larry and myself and several others, focused on a new approach for the toughest, the long-standing problems that we've tried and not succeeded with. So our mission is to solve the problem, not just identify causes. We try to eliminate as much as possible any subjective brainstorming. We insist on being data-driven, that science drives the analysis. We don't force ourselves into an unreasonable time limit. Problems may be messier than we hoped. And a lot less of it is done in groups, maybe only 10%. So that's a little different. So let me go back to that rear end collision situation. And let's say I picked a starting point for this, that the braking distance for a car is too long. So we might ask to begin with, well, what do we know about, what stops a moving object? How long, what distance will it travel, and so on. And so we can go back to high school physics, for instance, and get some basic formulas that drive every step of the analysis, not according to guessing, but according to equations wherever possible. So we can see here distance will be a function of velocity and essentially coefficient of friction. So we could start making that. We could say, the distance is long, and I have a number in there, 314 feet at 75 miles per hour. Remind myself of the relationship there. There's the formula. So every time I move down, it's not, I could easily say, well, braking distance is long. That's because these young drivers don't know, never driven in the snow. They don't know what they're doing. They're idiots. Or you could, there's a place for that in this tree, but we want to try to drive this in a rigorous way. So again, coefficient of friction is low, speed is high. We could start breaking down what are the factors that can determine the coefficient of friction. But then we, as often happens in this technique that I want to, I guess, kind of make clear, this can be messy. In a real simple way, I asked myself in this hypothetical situation, does this really make sense to go this direction? What really is the problem? How could I define it in the clearest way possible? And so the next iteration of defining the problem, I thought of as, well, it's not just that it takes a long time to come to a stop, it's really the distance that I'm capable of stopping in is longer or greater than the distance to that front car. So there's an overlap, which means we will collide. And again, that might not be it, but we continue down that path, keep completely open to realizing, oh, I wasn't thinking clearly enough, tear that up, let me start over here. Every time you do have that, a lot of people will get discouraged, and it's like, this is taking too long. It's I know what the problem is. There has to be an acceptance here that every time you feel the need to do that, you've learned something new to another level. So with that, I would start to say, okay, stopping distance capability is greater than the actual distance to the next car. So there's two parts to that. The stopping distance is long and the distance to the lead car is short. Simple as that. And of course, we'd want to put some data there typically. Going on from that, we would say, okay, now we can plug in that stuff I did earlier, where the stopping distance is long, and some of that is just looking at the capability of the car and its features to bring itself to a stop. So there again is the coefficient of friction, and of course that it's traveling at a high speed. However, are there other things that influence whether or not, or how fast or how short a distance within which can you stop? And so there comes some human elements, and typical, or that could be found through a study of human factors, for instance. And I put in a very pedestrian term, the thinking distance. So the idea of how long is a human going to spend observing and understanding what it is they're looking at, being able to gauge a distance or whatever. And then there's a reaction time. Once I do know that, oh my God, I do need to stop, what's the reaction time that people have? Those are very small times, but very critical in being able to avoid a collision. And then some examples of things below, for thinking distance, it could, one aspect could be that there are lots of distractions and so on. But instead of, I guess I want to say clearly that is not to the level of rigor that I would do it in real life, sort of. From there, for that area of human factors would require some research and not put some opinions there, but according to certain papers or books or experts in the field, these are the factors. So anywhere we don't have an equation, we want to think in terms of an equation using the factors that are well understood in science. Okay, then over more on the right, we can address the idea that distance to the lead car is short. So this is where, again, we do some research. And often I've called up experts around the country. I've called up professors who've written papers on different topics relating to this for psychology, social psychology, physiology, to find out, so you've spent your life studying this. Tell me, what are the factors that dictate this? Or what are the factors that will determine whether or not a person will choose to take this action? So in this case, just a few of them were things like if they have the belief that the lead car would never slow down that fast. So I'm okay. It's okay that I'm only 20 feet behind the guy at 75 miles an hour. I'm sure they're not dumb enough to slam on the brakes. So of course, that's a bad assumption. You shouldn't assume that. Then there's also the assumption of, well, I just got new tires and I have anti-lock brakes. And whatever happens, I'm sure I'm going to be able to stop quickly enough. So there's this perhaps false confidence in your ability there. And then another one is just the ability of the person to judge distance between themselves and the car ahead of them, and whether or not that distance is closing or getting longer and so on. So these things, again, would be fleshed out much more, and they would be driven from respected research on those topics. And I have several papers on this subject now. I've got to figure out how to put it in here without turning this into something that's impossible to read or take 2 days to get through. But so essentially what I'm trying to say, though, is we avoid brainstorming. We avoid all the problems with working in a group for the whole time. Things like, the most influential person is the one whose ideas get considered, or other people don't feel, like they're high enough in the pecking order to be able to disagree with someone else. So this is all about just moving from level to level according to equations if possible, and if you can't, to think in terms of equations. Okay, by understanding factors.
So David,
Yeah.
can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Do you really, so then you're taking each one of those and saying, where do I have data, or where can research tell me something? And if the answer is, I don't know if we have data, or, you know, if the answer is no, we don't have either one of those, do we put it aside and discard it, or just treat it a little differently?
We might, it's kind of, you know, up to the determination and so on of the person, but I might put down some things that I can think of, but it also might make me think about, well, what raw data might be available, or have I done that before? Could I talk to 5 or 10 people? So even if there's not a rigorous study done, what can I do to start and just make clear on the diagram or whatever that we haven't gotten the valid data, or we haven't verified it yet. But then, you know, and with each one of those, it really takes a lot of deep thinking about, if there isn't data there for that, let me rethink what really is, you know, are the words I have in that box
At the
correct?
DDS.
Oh, I'm sorry, what was that? I thought I heard someone. Okay. So it's not
Dang.
something that's
That
quick.
sucks.
Need to be sitting in a room, probably by yourself, or, you know, with no one else bothering you, and think through these things clearly and think of, you know, what data can I get? Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Just give you some examples of where I've used this before. And of course, I have to try to hide where these came from, but all these represent the value that we got from doing a much more rigorous job of understanding causes. In one case where a team had a very heavy and expensive mechanism designed to protect people, let's say, the team hoped for a 5% improvement. We sort of set the bar higher and said, you know, this is not, we want to do much better than that. Our real goal, as is my goal in reliability, as well as through this particular work, is if there's a problem with a component or a subsystem, let's eliminate it. Let's not, and that might seem impossible, but I find incremental improvement to be so very boring and so unimpressive, and it's a much better use, I think, of the intelligence and the experience that we hire into a company to have them pursue, you know, higher goals. Not meaning they take 5 times as long, may not take it longer at all, but the right mindset to begin with. We said, no, we're gonna get 90% or better improvement. Let's make that our goal. And as we went down through it, we eventually identified ways to do it, because we didn't really, some of the causes that came out were so, in hindsight, they seemed obvious, but now they were very clear, and there was a clear path for going forward. There has been another manufacturer I worked for, show you the extreme result of some of these things. There's a major problem costing millions per month. The key was we got down and defined the causes so clearly that the answer was actually completely obvious, but also it was so shocking to the engineers who owned the problem. They came close to not physically threatening me, but they said, listen, we are going to look so bad that we've spent millions and haven't resolved this thing after 2 years. This and this clearly can be solved overnight and for free. So that was very, very difficult. Kind of goes along with the idea of not just the causal analysis, but moving into innovation. Are people ready for that? Another one, again, it happens to be a safety issue, actually, in public safety. Many attempts to make a product that was going to protect people, protect innocent people while securing people who maybe have broken the law, to form its function in the most ideal way. So by having a much larger depth and breadth, we could finally convey to the supplier exactly what they needed to do. To that point, the supplier had no idea what we wanted or what we should need. Example, in a small company I worked with more recently, they were using a coating material that there were problems with, and especially in terms of applying it on the manufacturing line. It was not very safe. By going down and looking at causes again at a deep level, and then attaching data and letting that understanding drive experiments, we came to the interesting realization that the coating was unnecessary. We don't have to have the coating. We can do something else extremely simple that eliminates that need. And these, I know without going into the detail, it's probably hard to convey these, but you know, my limitation here. I guess what I want to convey is how successful it's been for me and several of the people I work with. And then finally down there, investigation of a helicopter crash. This can be used for understanding what were the unique, very unusual causes that made something happen. And kind of the key is if simple approaches or your regular approaches don't work, this can do a better job of ensuring that you've captured the whole breadth of possible causes as well as the depth. So if you need to know every possible way this thing can fail or this could have occurred, this is the most useful way I've found to do that. But again, I come out in the morning, my car doesn't start, I don't start graphing something like this. You know, I start with experience, and as the problems get more complex, maybe sometime I go back to Ford Motor Company or something, and we talk about the basic design of it. So there's a time and a place for this kind of thing, just as there is for, you know, brainstorming, I suppose, and 5 whys and so on. Some other applications, I don't know how those things showed up, those red lines. Maybe I did that. No? Oh well. Other applications. Personally, I think FMEAs are often done in a manner that is way too superficial and quick. When we say what are the potential ways something could fail, I think identifying those things ought to be done, or the way I do it is definitely in conjunction with this kind of causal analysis, and to be much broader and deeper, or within the action plans within an FMEA, you know, what is the action going to be? Quite often when I do it, it is things like we need to go deeper with understanding all the ways this particular failure mode could come about. And then as well, avoid things like, well, we're going to have more training, or we're going to add more preventive maintenance, or whatever. Those don't solve the problem. Another application, project management, the one I did with some people actually back at Honeywell, looking at our engineering labor estimates were always so off. We always went way over the estimates, and how could this be? And so we looked at all the things in terms of, you know, the method that is being used, where's the data coming from? How can we make better data available to people? And it all really came down instead to some human elements. As you all know, quite often, the idea of creating a budget or a proposal is like playing a game, or everyone is gaming the system. You want the quote to be as low as possible so you get the bid, but you don't want it to be as low as possible because you want you don't want to go over. And so there's that constant, you know, whether it's admitted or not, it's a game that gets played. And so we saw quite easily there were several ways to stop that game from playing, be realistic, have much better results. Human factors, I think it's, you know, I studied a lot of human factors in college and grad school. Important stuff, but I think something that's being overlooked quite often, and I'm working more and more on, is the motivations that come from beliefs about a system that a person is operating in, and how those motivations drive behavior. You can do all the things in the world to re-engineer a system or a workstation or whatever it might be, but if there's no inherent motivation for that person to do it, in my estimation, you're probably fooling yourself. And you're putting things in to cover your butt as opposed to really fixing the problem. So, and as for the examples I mentioned, there's so many within safety engineering. I've done a lot, it might be surprising, with social, more, I guess you'd call it social causes, or things for the common good in the community. Like I'm working on how to keep kids from dying in hot cars. Down in Arizona here, that's a big deal. I've also looked at, and I've contacted our local city council regarding tax policies, and specifically sales tax, and how you can use this method to really identify what are the causes that tell us that in reality we could charge sales tax but not charge sales tax. So we could get extra revenue for the city, but we would not charge sales tax. Seemed crazy, but by understanding the most basic causes at deeper levels that are pretty darn hard to refute, because we use this very rigorous methodology, it starts to, you know, to show some pretty interesting options. Whether or not people are really ready for those options is a whole nother thing. Organizational change. I've used this technique even within a company that I work for to understand how to get this technique more widely used in that company. People often say to me, so Dave, you're having a hard time figuring that out? Well, why don't you use your own medicine, use trees and see if you could do it. So we used that, and it was very useful, and it led me to many other things that I think might be interesting. I'll talk about it in a minute. And one other I'll mention, traffic control. Very, very interesting how many things we have in controlling traffic, protecting pedestrians or drivers, and how we rely so much on technology as opposed to understanding what the motivations are and and what they are not. Interesting study. I'll just say real quickly. It happened in Holland. The guy was trying to decrease the number of accidents at a certain intersection. Did a lot of study. They tried all kinds of things to decrease the number of small accidents, and none of them had tremendous impact. Like put in more left turn signals or more lane markers or whatever. But then realized one of the fundamental beliefs of people that were not being acknowledged is the more control we put in a system, the less the person has to take responsibility for their own behavior. So if they go into an intersection where they assume, hey, I'm following the rules, I'm sure everybody else is going to follow them. And so I'm cool. I'm going to go through. And of course, that's a lot of where accidents happen. So he tried an experiment that's kind of radical. So it's very slow to catch on. But he decided, I'm going to take the exact opposite approach. He got rid of all things that provided security or confidence. So got rid of lights, lane markers, crosswalk markings, everything. And then he would demonstrate how well that worked by blindfolding himself and walking into that intersection backwards without fear of being hit. Because now when people go through that intersection, they think, oh my gosh, anything could happen here. I got to actually make eye contact with different people. And I make my way through, accidents reduced by like 80%. Of course, you couldn't do that at all types of intersections, but it's an example of how getting down, of course, within technical elements, but also into human motivation, I found is key to almost every problem I've addressed.
Hey, David.
Yes.
Why don't let's pause here for a second, just see if anybody, so there you go. I'm starting to get some questions in, and let's pause to see if anybody wants to jump in live and unmute themselves or raise a hand. But Don Rossi sent in, how would you say that applying this approach has helped discipline your technical and creative thought process?
That's interesting. I guess I do latch on to, and I'm always looking for things that can help me make sense of the world more clearly, faster, lead me to deeper understandings. And so I use this a lot in most everything I do. I'm thinking not only about this reliability part, but also about another part I call trees. But it helps me understand, and it pushes me to want to learn new things. I've spent a lot of time talking with STEM advocates around the country, and one of the reasons I think could be so valuable is after I have gotten to learn more of these techniques and customize them for myself, I actually went back to the bookstore at Arizona State University and bought textbooks that I had thrown away a decade ago because I had a new reason and I had a new appreciation for so many different areas of science, for instance. And wouldn't that be a great thing for kids to have? So yeah, it's driven me quite a bit. Thanks, Don, for that.
Yeah, there's another one that came in. I want to explore this one just a little bit too, David, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And so I'll just sort of paraphrase the comment, but it was about being appreciative of what you're sharing. And in some ways it might seem counterintuitive to some people because of the principle of people know everything, and you need to just get to people who know where the work is and what the issues are, and bring it forward. it's a bit of a comment about that balance or how those two relate to each other.
Sure. Yeah, it's funny how often I'm saying this to my prospective clients or people I work with, that, your company is probably already full of people who know everything or have 20 or 30 years of experience on this difficult problem. That isn't what you're short on. What is needed, and to probably flip it, is to have people who have a real appreciation for and some skill in the area of rigorously dissecting and understanding. Because, when I'm in the mode of trying to solve one of my own problems, I'm terrible at it, or how can I say that better? I end up being stuck in the weeds because I've lived in that for so long. I need to have people come in and ask questions and make me look at it in different ways. But several times as well, I've had discussions with chief engineers or scientists, and it's made for a good communication and maybe a, I don't know, trust building thing to say, like, listen, Bill, I don't really understand how that works. You're using some big words there that I've never even heard before or something. Can you explain to me in super simple language and draw it on the board here what we're actually talking about? And then I'll ask some dumb questions. And even then, it can come out that perhaps they aren't quite so sure about some of the intricacies, or it makes them realize, well, yeah, we have assumed this and this and this, because I questioned them about it. So yeah, I think, well, who was it? Everyone claims credit. Maybe Einstein was one of them. You can't solve, the people who created the problem, how does that go, aren't necessarily the one to solve it. Or no. You know what I mean? Or anyone else know? What's that?
Dean, can I ask a quick question?
Go for it, Bob. I was just going to call you out. Well, in a good way.
Hi, David. It's good to see you again. And thanks for everything that you're sharing today. We've had this conversation before, and I know many people on this conversation, and it's a diverse audience between the physics-based crowd and the social science-based crowds. And while calculations and the statistical side will definitely explain on the physics side, as you said, eventually we're going to get to the human decision-making and human reasoning side, where the human and organizational performance folks come in. And the input side is, as Tanya was saying, is that just because we have availability of information from people that are there, is it necessarily relevant? Because the absence of some people that we need may not be there. But it's not so cut and dry when you're getting into doing statistics on the reasoning of people. So can you address how you mix the physics, the physical sciences and the social science and deal with the human performance side?
Sure. I guess I try to, how would you say it, back off a little bit and make it more abstract or generalized, I guess. So if someone is deciding that I'm going to steal this package off, this Amazon delivered package off of by my front door, they have to have a borrow from legal science, I guess, that they have to be motivated. There has to be a motive, a means, and a realistic expectation of getting away with it. So when we get into, motives can definitely take us into social sciences. And I definitely hesitate or would not say, let's start, brainstorming among us as to what are some reasons. Well, it's a poor neighborhood, or, whatever it might be. Instead, go think about these things in a general fashion, like what are the factors that someone runs through in their mind typically to determine whether or not they should do an illegal or unsafe thing. And there's tons of research available on that. People who spent their lives studying that, assembling that information, those factors, and of course some of them differ, but by going to those, getting clear on those, I think it's, to begin with anyway, many more, how can I say, you're not near as likely to be led astray, maybe not on purpose, but it won't be taken in a way that is biased by someone in your group, or the group's decision won't be biased by just one of the group's members' experiences. So back off to, and again, I still try to call it science, into, sociology, psychology, things having to do with more traditional human factors items, to acknowledge that it's such that you can go down this tree and say, okay, for these people, it's clear the factors are, you, first of all, let's say you have to have a motive for doing this. And there are several motives we can start to identify. Do they have the ability to do it? And is there a reasonable expectation of getting away with it? Now, let's take that to another level. How does someone go through that in their head? In terms of the decision making, do they think they can get away with it? Again, there's tons of research on that I find personally really interesting to explore. And again, it's something else I try to get kids to realize, that that's how you get interested in all types of science. But so I guess my recommendation is always to try to generalize, look for physics, and take advantage of the insight of existing experts' knowledge outside of your industry, but expert in that phenomenon, or that human motivation or behavior. With my degree in social work, I worked with kids in a psychiatric hospital for a long time. And so I got very, a lot of practice and personal experience with understanding behaviors, how to influence those behaviors. And always, of course, that's such a tough job. So not only then, but now I look for what's the most direct, practical means to understand those. So again, I get long-winded. I don't know if that came close to addressing that.
Dean, I didn't know because we're taking away from David's time to complete, but a lot of these questions are formulated around the social science and the human performance side.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. I guess, yeah, I'd love to carry on the discussion. Here's some comments, or have maybe some of these people would like to have a separate discussion offline. But I consider myself I'm not an expert, but I'm a student of just about everything. I consider I don't know very much. I'm not that smart, but I want to learn. So it's always, to me, the case of, or for me, it has come down to understanding motivations and why people do what they do. And for instance, with this slide, I started to generate a list of bad assumptions, things like, it'll be built into someone's action plan, kind of an assumption that, well, people want to learn and improve, so they'll do this. Everyone wants to. Well, no, not really. It's a mistake to think it's going to happen everywhere. If someone thinks a particular action is dangerous, they won't do it. Well, sorry, they do it all the time. There's probably some other reason why they decide to do it or why they aren't concerned about it. So I made a list, which, you know, there's no study behind this. I'm doing this to really to interact with other experts to try to get more rigorous listing of these things. But it's clear to me that many of these assumptions don't make, or they will provide nothing but, let's say, misdirection or lead you in a wrong path by assuming they're always true. Then I use this method of causal analysis to get down to what are the motivations, not only that are keeping someone from doing what you want them to do, but what are the things that that do motivate them. And when you think about it for yourself, I don't know, I've had these discussions quite often. You know, why do I do what I do? There's no way I can convince an engineer at some company to, you know, you should use all this all the time, or, you know, you should become expert. Well, there's a particular reason probably that I am interested and they may not be, and it's okay if they're not. But you know, I have very personal, intrinsic motivations for this. Sometimes people are willing to admit, sometimes not. So let's see, I'm trying to take a look at some of these. In terms of motivations and getting at them, what are they? They're hard to see, they're almost invisible. I'm consulting with a company right now. It's kind of like the IRS down in Australia, actually. And one of the things we need to do is, I don't want to say have like a psychoanalysis session, but really have some deep conversations with people that go beyond the typical, you know, how's the weather, or here's how you calculate this, to understand people better and get at what really drives them. It's kind of a cool thing that really that means as well, this work helps to promote a situation in our work lives where we get to know each other better on a personal level in many cases. Yeah, for me, you know, personal relationships are a big deal, and not just being alone in what I'm doing. So anyway, I don't want to just spout all my philosophy here.
No, I appreciate you continuing to add some insights, and I'd like to go, I'm going to go out on a limb, or try to a little bit, and just, you know, there's some good active chat going on in the chat box, which I totally appreciate. And I'm just going to call on a few people, and obviously it's optional. You know, if you want to add any of your insights or aha moments maybe that you've gotten from this conversation, but I'll start with Tanya. Tanya, you've added some thinking and great insights. You know, do you want to join in the conversation and share any of your observations or thoughts? And obviously you don't have to, but if you'd like to, I'd welcome it. And I'll also ask Sharon Small. Sharon, if you'd like to jump in, I'd love to hear from you also. But Tanya, you've just unmuted yourself. Tanya, what do you think?
I love the direction this is going. I think this is exactly the stuff that we need to be talking about. I mean, as you know, you might have picked up that I firmly believe the local rationality principle combined with the fundamental attribution error, which is not a bias, right? It's an error. It's an error. It's not a bias. So, and we do it all the time, especially in driving. Driving is the best example. Everybody else is a crappy driver. I'm not. Perfect example of the fundamental attribution error. This is exactly the kind of discussion we need to have. So, you know, I thank you for bringing this to us, because if we don't start getting away from the label of human error being it doesn't get us anywhere.
Yeah.
I can remember years ago reading a paper, you know what? Labeling something human error is similar to saying that something falls due to gravity. This is true. This is true. Things fall due to gravity. But what are we learning from that? Where are we getting any better from that? Where is that advancing our knowledge? So, and we've been in this human error label for way too long. And we can do much better, as you have mentioned, David. Like there are tons of people who have devoted their life careers to this. Why not take advantage of what they know?
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear you say a few words. I'm impressed. I think you know an awful lot about this already, and perhaps we can continue a discussion someday. But thank you.
Yeah, Tanya, thanks for jumping in. And Sharon, Sharon Small, do you want to jump into the conversation also?
Sure, I'll come in. I think I've undone my camera. I don't know what kind of my view is. But,
There you are.
You're back on.
am I? Okay.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, by the way, I am a great driver, and I know this because my physics evidence is I've never had an accident or been a cause for an accident. So that's my number one on physics.
Yeah.
So human behavior, I think there is a critical need for cause analysis to jump to the 21st century of cognitive psychology and systemic thinking when it comes to a human's involvement. It is our knee-jerk response to model everything a person does from our perception of what is good, right, and how things should be. And until we become a really excellent modeler of that person's perspective, that person's experience, how they see and view the world, all of these assumptions, all of these, like, you know, whether they're good assumptions or bad assumptions, are a moot point. Most interviewing methods, most ways that we work with humans and do our interviews and conversations are built from a criminal bias. They come from a criminal investigative background. And that alone puts us in a position where we are looking for intent. And when we're looking for intent, you are going to have blame. So this is one point. Like, if cause evaluation, of cause analysis, of critical analysis was to have one area of improvement, this would be in soft skills that are really hard skills, in getting a more gestalt and more accurate, authentic model from that person of what happened, how it happened, and what was happening for them at the time. This is the bottom line where it needs to
wish
go.
I could, I don't know if this is possible, but I'd love to talk to you sometime as well, or anyone. I thought, is it possible to put together sort of a library of take different actions that someone who doesn't have this background needs to try to understand, and say, here's kind of the general part of the model that pertains to why you would see this kind of behavior. Why, you know, someone is gonna decide, you know, to do something that's pretty unsafe. Why would I run through that yellow light? You know, what
You know, it could be from picking your nose to putting on mascara to simply catching the short skirt from the girl on the sidewalk. I'm going to risk something, you know, bias here. I'm not going to say who was in the car. You know, it could be anything. There's a million gajillion reasons why somebody might lose a moment of attention. And David, I would like to applaud you for bringing this in because it has sparked a really great conversation. So.
Good. Well, I should say, and I'll just jump here. I feel very, you know, hip these days, almost on a par with my daughter, that I have this little QR code here. If you can just hold your phone up to it, capture my contact information, please feel free to get a hold of me and discuss these things more. I should say one of the things too that I didn't really address yet is this one. No time to do it now, but I'd be happy to do it in the future as well. There are ways now to not just identify the problem, but now come up with those beautifully simple solutions that are not complex, sort of like that guy in the trying to improve the number or decrease the number of accidents in Holland. Such a simple idea that gets to the heart of problems. It's not a very good explanation, but trees is something that applies just as much to human factors or motivations as it does to anything else. I should say as well, I'm just a co-author of, the main author again is Larry Ball. These are free. So books, materials on everything I talked about today, plus on trees, is available at opensourcetrees.com. Again, it's completely free. Download however much you want. Interesting, we get he gets, probably lately more downloads come from the US, but so much of it has been from China, Middle East, what's another one? Malaysia, Japan, and not so much America. But I'm hoping to change that somewhat. So anyway, at the very end here, again, feel free to get a hold of me. I'm not sure how we're doing on time, if you want to do any more questions.
Let's do a couple things. Yeah, thank you. And thank you for putting the QR code back up for a couple of reasons. You know, a few people asked for that, so awesome. A couple people have asked about sharing the slides. So for those of you who may want the slides, you know, that's a great way to connect with David to be able to get those. I see, you know, I see Mr. Latino has himself unmuted, so I suspect he may have a question or comment.
Thanks, Ding. Most of the time people just think I talk too much, but that includes my wife. I just wanted to make a statement here about being the newest board member to the HPRCT, but it's one of the most unique organizations. What attracted me to it was the fact that it's even the name of human performance, root cause, and trending. You know, they seem to the people who do any of those individually, they seem, why are they together? And I think that your presentation demonstrates the need why they should be together, but they haven't been defined properly, because the division between and the understanding of the physics of failure, if you're strictly in a failure analysis mode, as opposed to understanding that to any physics of failure, you're going to have a human and an organizational component to it. Yeah. Those have to be melded together. They're not separate things. It's the human actions and the human reasoning is what leads to the physics of failure. Yeah. And then that we have to be able to join those things together. And I think that this conversation was a good split of those who attended, between those who look at just the root cause and as stopping and replacing stuff, as opposed to those human and organizational performance and HPI folks from the safety side are saying, you know, that the contribution of the human and the reasoning is what contributes to triggering that observable physical stuff. Yeah. So this has been a great conversation for me, and it defines the existence of HPRCT, because I don't know of another organization that is put together just for the purpose of melding the social sciences with the physical sciences.
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
great.
Awesome observation, Bob. Thank you for that, because it is, you know, how do you wrap up everything that an organization can do and learning and knowledge and bring it all together? So let's pause here for just see if anybody else has any questions or comments. And what I'd love to do is, as we're closing up, if you would, please go into the chat box and chat your one or two biggest takeaways from this discussion we've had over the last hours. If you share those with us, I would love to see them. And while you're doing that, I'll look to see if anybody else wants to unmute themselves and ask any final questions or make any comments. And looks like Dwayne Coffey, your hand is up. Dwayne, what do you think? What are your comments? Oh, Dwayne's hand was up.
Yep, there we go.
There you go.
I was going to go off Bob's comments. We've done some research at EPRI and the human performance with obviously power plant opportunities with humans. And one of the groups we've worked with is a company called Outcome Ingenuity. You guys may be familiar with them. And they do a good job of looking at the physical aspects of errors along with the human aspects of the errors. And they try to apply the science that David is talking about, research on the human factored side, so that you can still have a scientific approach to that. For example, you know, the science behind like they look a lot at the health industry, and they were looking at, you know, there's a rule that when a nurse comes into a room, she's required to ask you your name and your birthday every time to make sure she's in the right room. And they noticed that actually that did not occur, especially if the person was over 30. Once they did that the first time to a person over 30, they pretty much dropped that off. So that was like a human performance behavior for something that's a requirement. So they try to factor that in their analysis. And we used them for lockout, tagout opportunities in the power industry. So it was pretty neat to see that. And when we went to some of the power plants and walked through their protection, their defenses, and then, you know, you start looking at that defense and you start discussing the human aspect of that defense, how reliable that is or unreliable that is, and can you really count that anymore? It really opened up some eyes. So there are a few groups that try to look at the physical or the science, I say the science type of prevention, and then but they also throw in the human factor piece also to show where that impacts that.
Yeah.
And that's a good statement, David. The guy who owns I'm sorry, Dwayne. That's David Marks, M-A-R-X. David's got a unique background because I believe he's both. I know he's a lawyer and a engineer. that brings a very diverse perspective into things. And I deal in the healthcare realm myself, so I know David fairly well. And you must work with Patty and Paula as well if you're at EPRI. Okay. But thanks for the comments, Dwayne.
Yeah.
Okay, and with that, oh, Brian gesturing. Sorry if I mispronounced your surname. Brian, what's your comment or question?
First off, I really enjoyed the presentation. Thanks for having me along and allowing us to do this. I guess I was wondering, this is my first exposure to this aspect of using the physics or science-based one, and I was wondering if this was more effective for problems like you initially framed, where you're looking at, you know, rear-end collisions. When you're looking at rear-end collisions, that's kind of beyond the scope of any organization. So having human involvement in it is going to be challenging because it's such a huge, broad-based problem that you need to find a different factor to approach it. You know, my experience within failure analysis, root cause analysis is within specifically the field of forensic science. And with that one, that's why I was giving, not pushback per se, but really talking about getting the engagement from the population involved, because those are the people you need for the change. But again, being a neophyte to this and being involved in this now, I was just curious if you had a thought if your approach is better for those, you know, huge type problems that are beyond the scope of an organization.
Yeah, I think it's always the case, and hopefully I do it early in a process, or sometimes I think about it later and I have to start over, but I have to think, who am I doing this for? What is the purpose? I have to assume I have some kind of a role in this problem for this analysis. Like for the rear end collision, do I work for the insurance company? Do I, you know, am I with the state government or something? But for big problems that, you know, where it seems just way too large, it can still be a way to focus down in an area that is, say, within your purview, within a particular organization, but to be cognizant of and aware of sort of like the rest of the world and how they interact in this system as well. Not just your organization, your group, whatever, but to, I think anytime you can expand understanding beyond what you typically work with, it's always been really beneficial for me working in different companies that, you know, they hadn't thought about this or that because they, you know, that's outside my jurisdiction or whatever. So it's beneficial to do that, but at the same time, there are undoubtedly, many issues that do come down that seem to mostly be contained within your organization that still need the same kind of analysis and the same challenges. But hopefully they're done in such a way to contribute to what the larger system needs. I have to think of a good example for that, but it's so I think to give perspective, it's valuable to do that. So people don't just operate like in their little cave, and especially to understand motivations of other people. These people over here could give a darn about this particular problem at all, yet they are really instrumental in ensuring it happens, and we're supplying, let's say, the machine or the capability to do that. We don't understand those things that are outside. Be a lot of wasted time and sort of misdirected activity. This is another one I can tell that would probably make for a good offline discussion as well, so we can understand more. I'd love to understand more from your perspective and how you use this or how you do this kind of thing as well.
Dean, can I act off that comment as well? I know I'm overstaying my welcome here. This is to Brian's comment, and this is kind of, I want to put it all together for everybody in the sense that we're all have unity and purpose, is that we're all dealing with undesirable outcomes, no matter what they are. And as Brian just went through with the physics example, is that we're still all working off of cause and effect relationships. And what Brian was just bringing up is when you have physics and you have forensics, that's murky water anyway, because they can be both. But to me, they're both validation techniques that whatever hypotheses you come up with in a cause and effect structure, those you're going to apply physics to prove it, you're going to apply forensics, and you're going to apply the social science to that. All they are means of saying whether something did or didn't happen in a unique occurrence. So I think we're all saying the same thing. We all have our expertise, and I think that, again, we have unity and purpose in what we're doing.
Yeah, I suppose it's a good comment, both of you. The other thing I try to bring more people along for the ride, not that you're not thinking about this already, but to also realize that part of that is moving to a really great solution to it. So yes, doing all this work is essential to be prepared, to get that really elegant solution, but let's not think in terms of just handing it over the wall now to someone else and they take care of it. And that makes our job, I think, a whole lot more interesting as well, to say we get, in many places I worked in, that was the case. You handed it over the wall to someone else who owned it, and they might, not give it as much credence as it should or whatever. But yeah, getting involved in the solutions. That's the reason for all of it.
Absolutely. Great point.
Great point. Good way to wrap up our time together, David. Thank you. And I don't see any more hands up to ask any more questions. So David, thank you very, very much for leading us through a really great dialogue. Everybody, thank you for taking the time, and thanks for sharing your insights and asking your questions. And look forward to seeing you back here next month in our next webinar on the 4th Thursday of the month. So look for more info about that. And thanks for joining us today. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Really appreciate it. Stay safe.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.